Hey there, viewers. Imagine sitting across from a family member and they hit you with something that changes how you see them forever. Let me know in the comments if that has ever happened to you, because today, during a rare prison visit, Diddy told his family something so shocking, no one in that room could believe it. Let's get into it. Shadows in the waiting room. I've worked in this place long enough to know when the walls start to close in on a man. It's not just the clatter of keys or the slamming doors that do it. It's the stillness in between, that humming, buzzing kind of quiet where you can hear the building breathe. I clocked in early today, took the back corridor past rec, figured I'd rather keep my distance from the morning chaos. This place, Brooklyn MDC, is always chaos, but some days it feels heavy, like today. The overhead lights flicker more than usual. Nobody's been able to get maintenance in fast enough, not with half the staff stretched thin and the other half not giving a damn. So it's this pale, sick kind of light that makes everything and everyone look a little gray, a little drained, concrete walls sweating moisture, metal bars cold to the touch, smells like bleach and old sweat, smells like time stopped moving a long while ago. I do my rounds slow, taking the long way past the common areas. Inmates shuffle around, some louder than others, some with that hollow-eyed stare. Most keep their heads down, not much reason to stick your neck out around here. But there's always that group, you know the type. The ones who know something before the rest of us do. Today, they're huddled in the corner, their voices low but urgent. I catch bits of it as I pass by. He's got someone coming today, family. Nah, you serious? Thought he was cut off. Bet you 5 he don't even look him in the eye. One guy laughs, a sharp, humorless sound. Man's got nothing left. Bet he breaks. They don't say his name, not outright. They don't have to. Everyone knows who they're talking about. Diddy. Sean Combs, Puffy, whatever name he's carried over the years. In here, he's not much more than another body waiting out the hours, blending into the hum of the place. But he's also not. Some folks walk in with the kind of shadow that stretches longer than the corridors, and his is one of them. I've watched him these past few weeks, kept my eyes sharp, because when a man's fallen from that high, the cracks show sooner or later. He don't talk much, keeps to himself mostly. Limp's gotten worse, knee looks stiff like he's dragging it behind him. Word's been floating around, he had surgeries before, maybe old injuries catching up, maybe something worse. Some even whispered about more serious things, like maybe he's sick. Real sick, stuff you don't want to believe but spreads fast in a place like this. One of the younger guards, Thompson, leaned over to me during meal watch yesterday, nodding toward Diddy's table. Look at him, he muttered, hair's grayer every day. You hear what they're saying? I pretended not to, let him keep talking. They're saying he's got something bad, like HIV bad. It was half a whisper, half a dare. Thompson's the kind who likes stirring the pot, getting reactions. I shrugged, kept my eyes forward. This place eats rumors for breakfast. Whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. It's what people believe that moves the needle. What's real, though, is this. The man's a shadow of what he walked in as, thinner, slower, doesn't meet anyone's eyes unless he has to, and today the air feels heavier around his name. Word about the family visit's been circling all morning. We're not told specifics, who's coming or what it's about. That's way above our pay grade, but everybody knows something's happening. I head toward the waiting area posted there today for the visit. It's not much, just a line of hard plastic chairs, a desk that's seen better decades, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Walls painted that faded off-white, the kind that somehow makes things feel smaller, tighter. The clock ticks louder in here. Through the bulletproof glass, I catch sight of the outer lobby, a few figures standing stiffly, hands clasped in front or tucked tight against their bodies. I can't make out faces yet, but you can tell a lot from posture. One older woman looks tired even from a distance. Two younger ones, both dressed sharp but holding tension in their shoulders like they're carrying invisible weights. They've been waiting a while, I can tell, the kind of wait where you keep rehearsing what you're going to say, only to know it won't come out right when the time comes. I glance at the logbook. No names written, just a generic family entry approved for the day. Doesn't say much else. Protocol keeps it that way. Less information passed around, fewer mouths running. Behind me, Jenkins from the desk shifts in his seat, tapping his pen. "You think he's gonna lose it?" he asks without looking up. I grunt. "Don't know." Jenkins smirks. Man like that used to running the world. Now sitting in here, eating mush, lights buzzing all night. Family showing up, probably seeing him like a ghost of himself. Can't imagine. I don't say anything back. I've seen it too many times. The ones who crumble the minute someone from the outside looks at them different. It's not the time inside that breaks you. It's seeing your reflection in somebody else's eyes and not recognizing yourself. The door buzzes. The visitors step through, one by one. Security's tight. Searches, checks, the whole drill. But they move through it quietly, like they've done this before. Or maybe just want to get it over with. I watch their faces as they enter the waiting area. Eyes scanning, not looking at anyone in particular, avoiding contact. They sit down stiffly, hands folded in laps. None of them talk. Just silence hanging heavy between them, the kind that fills a room like water, pressing in. For a moment, everything feels slowed down, like the air's thicker. I catch a glimpse of something in one of the younger women's eyes, a flash of something sharp, maybe anger, maybe sadness, hard to tell. They don't look up when another family across the room talks loudly, their voices bouncing off the walls. They're in their own bubble, tightly sealed. I keep glancing at the door, knowing Diddy's about to be brought in. The other guards have been talking all shift about how this'll go down. Will he play it cool, fall apart, beg? It's all speculation, the kind of thing people use to kill time, make bets. But me, I don't bet on people like him. There's something about watching someone strip down to nothing, no entourage, no cameras, no headlines, that tells you who they really are. And I've got a feeling whatever happens in this room today, it's not something anyone's gonna forget. The door at the far end creaks open. I don't move, just watch. His footsteps sound slower than I expected, heavy, dragging just slightly. His shoulders look narrower than they used to, jacket hanging loose, gray in his beard catching under the harsh lights. He doesn't scan the room like he's sizing it up, doesn't puff up or play it big. His eyes are set straight ahead, and the moment he sees them, his family, there's this flicker, not quite visible unless you're really looking. They don't rush up, no smiles, no tears, just quiet tension stretching between them like a wire ready to snap. I keep my face neutral, standing back, but inside I feel it. That press of silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. Something's about to happen. You can feel it in the walls. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Glass. He moves through the corridor like a shadow that forgot how to cast itself. The lights overhead flicker, washing out color, turning everything pale and flat, and in that dimness, his figure doesn't look like the man from the glossy magazine covers or the endless red carpet photos. No, the man walking the halls now is something else entirely. Shoulders slightly hunched, steps uneven, left leg dragging just a fraction slower than the right. The soft scrape of his shoe against the concrete floor is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and if you weren't paying attention, you might think it was the sound of the building settling into itself. There's a mirror in the corner of his cell, bolted to the wall, scratched so bad you can't get a clear look at yourself if you try. But it doesn't stop him from pausing in front of it each day. Same time, same ritual. The reflection staring back at him doesn't look like the man who once commanded boardrooms, stage lights, entourages. His face has thinned out, cheekbones cutting sharper beneath skin that looks like it's stretched too tight. Stubble creeping along his jaw isn't dark anymore. The gray has taken over, spreading like frost. The eyes, those are the hardest part. There's nothing left behind them. No flash, no spark. Just two hollows where once you might have found ambition, control, maybe even arrogance. No one speaks when he walks past now, not unless they want to whisper. Inmates used to crowd near the doors trying to get a word in, maybe a favor, maybe just to see if the rumors about him were true. But now they fall quiet, watchful, some with smirks pulling at their lips, others with something close to awe, like he's turned into a ghost story walking on two legs. There's been talk, like there always is. Some say he's got something wrong with him, something serious, something crawling under his skin that's got him losing weight, hair graying faster than it should. Others think it's just the inside of this place chewing him up, the noise, the isolation, the fact that no amount of money or fame can stretch past these concrete walls. Guards keep their distance too, not out of fear, it's something else. They'll joke to each other, sure, laugh about how he used to have private jets and now can't even get a decent night's sleep. But there's an edge to it, thin and sharp, a kind of respect that comes not from who he was out there, but from the way he's handling being nothing in here, because that's what happens to everyone eventually. The noise stops, the calls stop, the people stop showing up, and you're left with the silence, louder than anything else. Thompson had something to say about it again this morning, always does. "Man walks like a ghost," he muttered, leaning up against the mess hall door as we watched the line shuffle through. Don't eat half his tray, doesn't talk, barely even blinks. Jenkins chimed in, shaking his head. He's buying his time, waiting on whatever's next. You see his knee today? Looks like it's about to give out. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Everyone's got their own theories, their own running commentary. They can't help themselves. It's easier to make guesses than to admit no one really knows what's going on inside a man's head when everything's stripped away. They say he barely says a word to anyone, not to the lawyers when they visit, not to the guards doing rounds. The silence is wrapped around him tight now, like a second skin. He used to stand straighter when he first arrived, kept his chin up, eyes sharp, movements careful but purposeful. You could almost see him calculating the room, adjusting to it, waiting for a way to bend it to him. But not anymore. It's different now, like each day's been draining him out in small increments, and the person that walked in weeks ago has been hollowed out, leaving only enough behind to keep the routine going. This morning they gave him fresh clothes for the visit. Standard issue but clean. He folded them neatly, precise. Same way he moves, like every gesture's controlled even when there's nothing left to control. The gray shows clearer against the collar, his hands thinner now, veins visible. Smooth the fabric before he slides the shirt over his shoulders. By the time he's let out, the hall is quiet except for the usual buzz of electric locks clicking open and shut, inmates watching from corners, from behind thick glass. Some exchange glances, some whisper, some just stare. Maybe they're waiting to see if today's the day he stumbles or snaps or speaks, but he keeps his head straight, doesn't look left or right. There's something about the way he moves that sticks with you long after he's passed by. Not hurried, not slouched, just steady, mechanical, like a clock ticking down seconds towards something none of us can see yet. As he reaches the end of the corridor, past the cells and the low hum of conversations behind bars, the visitation area looms ahead. Cold, sterile, with plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a wall of thick glass cutting the room clean in half. Everything in there feels too bright, too harsh under the buzzing overhead lights. He pauses at the threshold just briefly, almost like he's bracing himself. Behind that glass, the visitors are already seated. I can see them from where I stand off to the side, silent, hands folded, eyes trained ahead but unfocused. No names given, no introductions made, just family written on the sheet. Doesn't matter who they are exactly, the weight in their shoulders says enough. It's not hard to see how much of him they're not recognizing anymore. He steps forward, measured, every step landing a little heavier than the last. The door swings closed behind him with a hollow thud, and for a long moment, nothing moves. Nothing breathes. Just him on one side, them on the other, the glass in between reflecting both back at each other like a distorted mirror. No words pass between them yet. Maybe they're stuck somewhere between what was and what's left. Maybe they're wondering what he's going to say, or maybe they already know. From where I stand, watching it all unfold, it's hard not to feel like I'm witnessing something slow motion unravel. A man who once walked through cameras flashing, crowds parting, deals closing, now just another figure behind the glass, stripped bare under the sterile lights. And whatever's about to pass between him and them, whatever's been held back all this time, you can feel it pressing against the silence, waiting. Chapter 3. The visitors arrive. It always starts the same way this part of the day. A steady trickle of bodies filtering through the outer doors. Cold air rushing in from the street every time the locks click open. You can feel it before you see it. A slight shift in the atmosphere, like the building itself stiffens in anticipation. I've worked the visitor processing station long enough to know the rhythm by heart. Same hollow greetings, same rustle of coats being peeled off, same expressions painted across the faces, nervous, worn, hopeful, sometimes stone-faced. But today's different. You can tell by the way the officers stand a little straighter near the entrance, their eyes flicking toward the clock more often. Whispers pass between them like static. Everybody knows someone important's coming, though the details, as usual, are kept vague. Visitors logged in under family, no names listed, no unnecessary specifics. Just enough information to keep things moving and mouths shut. Still, you hear things. Rumors leak through the cracks faster than the cold does. I keep my post behind the check-in desk, clipboard balanced in my lap, scanning IDs like I've done 1,000 times before. The fluorescent lights overhead hum steady, casting a sterile, yellowed glow across the metal benches and faded linoleum tiles. Everything feels harder in here, the chairs, the air, the way time stretches thin. The first thing I notice about them is how quiet they are. They step through the metal detector one by one, each movement precise, practiced. No fumbling with belts or pockets. No unnecessary words exchanged, just a nod here, a glance there, as if they've been through the motions before or spent enough time preparing for how it would feel. There's an older woman first, thin frame, coat hanging loose around her shoulders. She keeps her hands clutched tight in front of her, fingers twisting slightly, eyes downcast but scanning, like she's trying not to take in too much at once. Behind her, 2 younger women follow close, well-dressed, put together, but you can see it in the way their jaws are set, the tension stretched across their faces like glass about to crack. They don't speak to each other, not even in whispers, not even to comment on the security pat-downs or the guards barking instructions. Their eyes stay forward, focused on the path ahead, deliberately avoiding the curious glances from the other visitors seated in the waiting area. That's where it becomes clearer how different they are from the usual crowd. Most visitors have a certain restlessness about them, shifting in their seats, murmuring under their breath, kids fidgeting at their sides. Some carry plastic bags with commissary items, letters, photos folded tight. There's a routine to it all, rehearsed apologies, hopeful promises, nervous laughs, but not these 3. They sit rigid, hands neatly folded, back straight, no clutter, no chatter, just silence that fills up the space around them like a wall. From where I sit, I can feel the ripple moving through the room. Whispers starting near the door, making their way down the row of benches, subtle but steady. Is that them? Yeah, came all the way here for him. Wonder what they're gonna say to him after all this. It's not hard to piece together who him is. The name floats unspoken but understood. Everyone's aware of who's sitting behind those walls today, waiting for a visit. And everyone's curious, even if they won't say it outright. You can't have a man like that in a place like this without people watching every move, waiting for cracks to show. The guards exchange glances too. I catch Thompson leaning near the entrance, arms folded, smirking slightly. "Didn't think they'd show up," he mutters under his breath, eyes flicking toward the older woman. "Guess family's family." Jenkins just shrugs, but he's watching too, same as the rest of us. Nobody says much, but you can feel it hanging in the air. Speculation, judgment, something close to pity, maybe. It's hard to tell. The process drags longer than usual. Extra security measures, extra scrutiny. Not that it's necessary, but protocols are followed to the letter today. Pat-downs more thorough, ID checks double verified, every item inspected twice before being cleared. I can see the older woman's lips press tight when the guard pulls apart her purse, carefully laying out every object on the table like pieces of evidence, nothing unusual. Keys, tissues, a worn wallet, but still, she watches every movement, waiting for it to be over. When they're finally cleared, they're led toward the inner waiting room. Their steps sound too loud against the floor, echoing off the concrete walls. They don't look at anyone else, and no one dares meet their eyes directly. I notice one of the younger women pause briefly at the edge of the room, her gaze flickering to the vending machines against the far wall, then back down to her folded hands. She shifts her weight, adjusting the sleeve of her coat, and for a moment, I wonder if she's fighting the urge to leave, to turn around and walk right back out into the cold, where at least the silence belongs to you. But she does. They sit down in the corner, away from the other visitors. There's a mother 2 rows over trying to keep her kid quiet, a man in a worn jacket nervously rubbing his palms together, a middle-aged woman clutching a photo between her fingers. All of them steal glances toward the 3 sitting so still, wondering what they're here for, what's about to be said, but none of them will ask. You don't ask things like that in here. I hear snippets, small, sharp-edged sentences passed between visitors. That's his mother, right? Don't look like she's doing too good. Wonder what they think about everything he's in for. Another guard passes by, clipboard tucked under his arm. Doesn't bother hiding the way his eyes linger. Everyone's waiting to see if they'll break the silence, if one of them will lean over and whisper something, show some crack in the calm they're holding on to. But they don't. Minutes drag by like hours. The clock ticks slow, the buzz from the lights overhead gnawing at the edges of the room. I shift in my seat, glance back at the entrance, knowing it won't be long now before he's brought in. But the tension builds heavier with every second. You can feel it pressing down, making the air feel thick enough to choke on. What are they here for? That's the question sitting heavy in the room, even if no one says it out loud. Are they delivering news, demanding answers, offering support, or cutting ties? You can't tell by looking at them. They give nothing away. The sound of boots approaching pulls everyone's attention to the hallway. The door creaks open, one of the guards motioning them to stand. They rise slowly, smoothing out their clothes, their faces unreadable. They don't look back as they're led through the secure doorway, toward the visitation room. The door swings shut behind them, sealing off the space like a vault. And just like that, the waiting room returns to its usual rhythm. The vending machines humming, the low murmur of other visitors, the sound of the clock ticking, counting down whatever conversation's about to take place behind that thick pane of glass. Everyone's still watching, though. Wait, Chapter 4, Face to Face. The door to the visitation room seals behind them with a weighty thud, as though it's locking not just the bodies inside, but something intangible, something heavier, less visible. Something neither side wants to acknowledge. The air inside feels thinner, drier, stale, despite the hum of the overhead vents. Fluorescent lights buzz faintly, casting shadows that pool in the corners, making everything appear slightly off color, like a poorly tuned television screen. The room itself is stripped bare. No decoration, no warmth, just the long slab of shatterproof glass dividing one side from the other. A few fixed plastic chairs bolted down, and the faint echo of shuffling footsteps bleeding in from somewhere down the corridor. They move to sit first, the three of them, settling into their places without a word, without even glancing at each other. The older woman lowers herself slowly into her chair, careful, deliberate, her fingers gripping the edge of the metal table as though steadying herself. The younger women follow, their movements sharp, precise, posture stiff. There's something rehearsed about the way they carry themselves, like they've mapped out every gesture in advance, determined not to let anything slip that they don't intend. And then the far door opens. It's not loud, but the shift in atmosphere is immediate. The faint murmur of distant conversations, the steady hum of electric locks, all seem to fade out at once as the man steps inside. He looks thinner than they expected. The room does him no favors, the stark overhead light catching every hollow in his cheeks, every shadow beneath his eyes. His shoulders are narrower now, jacket hanging too loose. The gray in his hair has overtaken whatever color once clung there, spreading like frost, dull and unkempt. His gait is careful, deliberate, as though each step is measured to hide how uneven it really is. A faint limp drags behind him, barely noticeable unless you're watching closely, but enough to mark that something's changed, something's given out, whether from time, stress, or something deeper that nobody has said aloud yet. The family doesn't move at first. Their eyes track him silently as he lowers himself into the chair opposite them. There's no glass barrier between them, not in this section. It's a non-contact visit, but supervised. The presence of guards felt more than seen, stationed just outside the room. Still, there's an invisible wall between the four of them, thicker than any pain could have been. A silence that stretches thin, taut, brittle. He looks at them, face impassive, eyes unreadable. They look back, each with their own version of restraint. The older woman's expression is softer, but lined, exhaustion pulled tight around her mouth and brow. Her hands tremble faintly as she folds them in her lap. The younger women hold themselves with practiced control, one with her jaw clenched slightly, the other's fingers tapping silently against the edge of the table, rhythmic, almost imperceptible. Nobody speaks first. The seconds drag, their weight gathering in the room like dust settling on unused furniture. There's something jarring about the stillness, how out of place it feels after the noise outside. The process of security checks, whispered gossip, all falling away until nothing remains but this. Four figures seated opposite, locked in a standoff without weapons, only history hanging heavy between them. Finally, he clears his throat. "You all right?" The words come out rough, barely louder than a murmur, cracked around the edges like they've been sitting unused for too long. His gaze shifts to each of them in turn, lingering slightly longer on the older woman. She nods, small, tight, as though speaking might unravel something. She opens her mouth, hesitates, then closes it again, her eyes softening for a split second before her lips press together. The younger of the two women leans forward slightly, hands folded neatly on the table's edge. She studies him, eyes sharp, measuring. "You look," she starts, voice low but steady, leaving the sentence unfinished. It trails off like she doesn't know whether the word she was reaching for is appropriate, or if there is even a word that fits. He doesn't flinch, doesn't react. "It's nothing," he says simply, brushing past it like it's irrelevant. His fingers tap once against the table, a mimicry of her own earlier motion. "Don't worry about all that." They don't push him, not right away, but the weight in the room shifts slightly, thickening, as though there's something unspoken clinging to the walls, hovering just out of reach. The older woman shifts in her chair, adjusting her coat around her shoulders. She glances at the guards stationed near the door, then back at him, her mouth opening like she might finally ask what's already written all over her face, about his health, about how he's really holding up. But instead she just swallows the question, lets it sit there between them like an unanswered phone ringing in another room. It's one of the younger women who breaks the silence next, voice quieter this time, tone clipped. "What's happening with everything?" She doesn't say the word court. Doesn't have to. For a moment, he doesn't respond, just leans back slightly, the chair creaking faintly beneath his weight. His eyes drop to the table, studying the scratched surface, then flicker back up. "Same as before," he says, shrugging one shoulder like it's nothing, like there aren't headlines swirling outside these walls or lawyers cycling in and out of his case like a revolving door. "Don't worry about that either." They exchange brief glances, something sharp passing between them, too quick to catch entirely. He notices it, doesn't comment. The minutes stretch, again, elastic, pulling thin but never quite breaking. Every small movement feels magnified. The way he taps his fingers once more, the way the older woman shifts slightly in her seat, the faintest crease forming between the brows of the woman seated closest to him. A guard clears his throat from near the door, the sound echoing faintly. He leans forward then, resting his elbows on the table, hands folded. His voice lowers, words soft but deliberate. "Look," he starts, and whatever expression flickered in his eyes before is gone now, replaced with something flat, unreadable. "I know it ain't easy. Ain't been easy." Nobody corrects him, nobody fills the space. His gaze moves to each of them again, pausing briefly, like he's weighing something invisible on the table between them. Then he leans in slightly more, shoulders hunching just a fraction, voice dropping to almost nothing. What he says next isn't loud enough for anyone else in the room to catch. Not the guards stationed outside, not the other visitors passing through, just them, just the three sitting across from him, their faces flickering between surprise, confusion, something deeper that tightens their expressions before they smooth over again. Whatever it is, whatever words fall between them in that moment, it lands heavy, pressing into the cracks already forming. He leans back after like the weight of it's been lifted from his shoulders but transferred to theirs. Nobody speaks right away. They sit there, each of them holding that silence now, trying to figure out what to do with it. The air feels heavier as the seconds drag. Outside the door, the usual rhythms continue. The shuffle of footsteps, the faint murmur of other conversations. But inside the room, it's as though the rest of the world has stilled, held at bay by whatever invisible barrier just fell between them. Eventually, one of the younger women straightens in her seat, smoothing out her coat sleeve with deliberate precision. She nods once, short, tight. The older woman reaches for her bag without a word. They don't linger when the guard steps forward to signal the end of their time. No parting words, no hugs or reassurances, just three figures standing in unison, shoulders squared, masks slipped back into place. He stays seated as they move toward the door, watching them without expression. And when the door closes behind them, it's like the air thins out again, leaving only the faint hum of the lights and the hollow echo of things left unsaid. Chapter 5. The rumor mill turns. The thing about a place like this is the walls have a way of stretching stories. You could whisper a sentence in one corner, and by the time it echoes down the corridors, through mess hall chatter, past the laundry rooms and back up to rec, it'll come back to you twice as long, twice as sharp, and nowhere close to how it started. That's the way it's always been here at MDC 23. Truth doesn't stand a chance once the rumor mill starts grinding. It didn't take long after the family visit for the first whispers to begin. Barely a few hours had passed since he'd walked back down the corridor. Same slow steps, same hollowed-out stare, before the inmates started piecing together their own versions of what had gone down. Nobody outside that room heard a word. But that didn't stop anyone from deciding they knew exactly what was said. I was standing near the east block when it started, listening without trying to listen, leaning up against the wall while the guys from Unit B swapped stories over the low hum of the vent fans. There's a regular group that sticks together during rec, always the same faces. Jermaine, Big T, Dorsey, all of them lifers or damn close to it. They've got nothing but time, and they use it the same way others might gamble with cigarettes or commissary snacks. They trade and gossip. Jermaine was the first to bring it up, voice low but sharp, glancing over his shoulder every so often, like he didn't want it to look like he cared too much. "Swear to God," he muttered, picking at his thumbnail. "I heard he told him to cut him off, said straight out, 'Don't come back, don't wait around.'" Dorsey leaned in, eyebrows arched. "What, like disowning himself?" "Nah, man, no way, he ain't built like that." Jermaine shrugged, but you could see it in his eyes. He believed it, or at least wanted to believe it. There's something satisfying about picturing a man like that, once untouchable, untouchably rich, sitting there telling his family to leave him behind, admitting it's over. Big T wasn't having it though. He cracked a grin, shaking his head. "Bet money it's not that." Betty slipped him something, a number, told him where to move the stash before the feds get it. The others laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was easy. Easy to imagine someone like Diddy still pulling strings, still playing the game even with his hands tied behind bars. Every man in here knows the system's got more loopholes than they can count, and someone like him's more likely than most to find one. It didn't matter that no one actually knew. Didn't matter that the guards weren't talking, that the official story was tight, that the family left without a word. None of that ever stops the machine from running. By the end of the day, I heard at least 5 different versions floating down the corridors. One said he told his mother goodbye for good, that he's not making it to trial. Another said he's planning something, suicide, escape, no one could decide which, and the family came to talk him out of it. Someone even swore up and down he confessed to something, that the whole visit was him unburdening a secret none of us could even guess at. You'd think people would be more careful, but that's the thing about this place. It's hungry. It feeds off these stories because there's nothing else to pass the time, nothing else to make the hours bearable, especially when it's someone like him at the center of it all. Doesn't matter how long you've been in, everyone's still half fascinated, half repulsed by the idea of a man with that much, brought down to nothing. Even the guards couldn't keep their mouths shut. I caught Jenkins at the desk later that night, leaning over toward Thompson like he was trying to keep it casual, but his voice carried. "Swear to God, man," Jenkins was saying, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. "I heard from one of the guys on shift that he's losing it. Told the girls not to come back. Said something about not making it to sentencing." Thompson grunted, flipping through his logbook without looking up. "Yeah? What else is new? Everybody cracks eventually." But there was something in the way he said it. Less sure, maybe. Like he didn't quite know if he believed it this time. It didn't stop there either. By the next morning, the whole place was buzzing. One of the younger inmates, a loudmouth named Carter, who's always claiming he's got an ear to everything, swore blind that he overheard something while mopping near admin. "Man's sick," Carter said confidently over breakfast trays, voice just loud enough to carry. "Not just bad knees, serious sick. You hear how gray he's gone, and the weight? Bet he's not making it to trial at all." Some of the others rolled their eyes, but enough people leaned in to listen that you could feel it gaining traction. It's not like anyone had concrete proof, but in here proof's never been the currency. It's belief. It's the version of the story that feels the most dangerous, the most satisfying. And that's when the comparison started, the older guys bringing up names, reminding everyone of the ones who came before. "Remember when they brought that baseball guy in here?" Jermaine said later, wiping down one of the tables in the mess hall. "Big name, real clean image, until he wasn't. walked the halls like he still owned something right up until the day he folded. Another chimed in, nodding. Or that politician couple years back. Same deal, suits, smiles, all of it. Didn't last. The stories circle like vultures, picking apart every detail, every scrap of behavior. Doesn't matter who you were outside these walls, in here, the past don't mean much. It's all about how you hold up when there's no one left watching. But the thing about Diddy is, he's still being watched. Every step, every word, every silence. And the fact that nobody knows what exactly passed between him and his family during that visit, that makes it worse. People fill in the blanks, each version darker than the last. I caught snippets everywhere over the next few days, some saying he was planning to flip, maybe make a deal no one saw coming. Others convinced he's cutting ties, severing everything before it collapses. One guy even claimed, though no one quite believed him, that Diddy's been talking to someone in solitary, sending out messages through the guards. It didn't help when he stopped showing up for rec that week. Skipped meals a couple times too, though no one could confirm why. Some said it was the meds they've got him on. Others whispered about something more serious. And every time the rumors came up, there was this undercurrent running beneath it all. Not just the usual fascination or idle curiosity, something sharper, meaner, a kind of satisfaction in watching someone like that unravel. The guards kept their usual front, cracking jokes, shrugging it off, but even they lingered a little longer at shift change, comparing notes. One of the older guys mentioned he looked thinner every time they saw him, quieter. Another said he's been staring at the walls more lately, like he's somewhere else entirely. No one knows for sure. That's the thing that keeps the engine running, because the truth's locked up tight, behind closed doors, and in here, the empty spaces always get filled, one way or another. By the end of the week, nobody's talking about much else. Whatever he whispered to his family that day, whatever passed between them in that room, it snowballed into something bigger than all of us. Everyone's waiting to see if the cracks will finally show, if he'll fold the same way others before him did. But the thing is, nobody really knows. And that's what keeps them watching. Chapter 6. Fractures behind bars. Nights are the worst inside these walls. The hum of daytime activity, the shuffle of feet, the slam of doors, the low murmur of voices, all fades out. And what's left behind feels too heavy, too still. That's when you start noticing the cracks forming, the little things men hide during the day but can't quite hold together once the darkness settles in. Some pace, some pray, some stare at nothing like they're trying to see past the concrete, past the bars, into whatever world exists beyond this place, and some, like him, start unraveling in ways you don't expect. Lately, it's been harder not to notice. I've worked plenty of night shifts, enough to know the rhythms by heart, but ever since that visit, ever since the room went quiet and those whispers started spreading down the halls, the patterns shifted. He's not the same. You can see it in the small things, the way he moves, the way he talks, or doesn't. Used to be he kept his routine like clockwork, meals, rec, legal meetings, even the silence between interactions had a precision to it. Like he was holding something tight, keeping it from slipping. But now it's different. A few nights back, I caught sight of him pacing, cell door closed, but the slit in the door's enough to see movement. Back and forth, slow at first, like he was working something out of his muscles. But as the hours ticked by, the pace got sharper, quicker, like he couldn't stop, like whatever was in his head had turned into something physical, clawing its way out through his steps. Every so often you'd catch him murmuring, nothing clear, just low words, barely audible even over the hum of the vents. Thompson mentioned it to me the next morning, leaning against the corridor wall, coffee in one hand. "You see him last night?" he asked, nodding toward the row of cells. "Man's wearing a groove in the floor." I didn't say much, just nodded. He kept going, lowering his voice. Swear I heard him talking to himself. Can't make out what he's saying. Same thing over and over. There's a weight behind the words. One Thompson's not saying outright, but doesn't have to. We've both seen men start to splinter like that. Sometimes it happens quick, sometimes slow, but the signs are always there, if you're paying attention. Then there's the other thing, the medical staff. Normally you get the same crew coming in, nurses checking vitals, maybe a doc once a week for standard stuff. But the past couple days there's been a different team, not the usual faces. No introductions, they come in quiet, don't linger, heads down. Unmarked scrubs, no visible IDs, just move through like they're trying not to leave a footprint. Jenkins spotted them first, muttered something about how it wasn't standard, said he heard one of them asking for restricted access down in admin. Didn't say why, nobody knew why, but it was enough to get people talking. Didn't help that they made a stop by his block. Didn't help when word got around that he skipped lunch the same day. The rumors had already been swirling ever since his family left without looking back, ever since Carter started running his mouth in the mess hall about health issues, weight loss, all that. But seeing a fresh team of medical staff moving through without explanation, that poured gasoline on the fire. Guys in rec whispering about how maybe it's worse than anyone thought. Maybe something's catching up with him. Some said it outright, HIV. Others speculated cancer. Nobody had facts, but facts aren't the currency here. It's perception. And right now, perception's eating him alive. The thing is, it's not just the inmates fueling it. Even the guards have started noticing how thin he looks, how he walks slower, the limp more pronounced. Jenkins joked the other day, dark humor, the kind that covers discomfort, that maybe the man's got more ghosts trailing him now than anyone can count. Thompson added something about how the ones who come in used to power always break the hardest. I didn't laugh. It's not funny watching a man come undone. And then the lawyer visit got canceled. Normally he meets with them twice a week, regular as anything. We process them through, same faces, same briefcases, same tight expressions. But this time, nothing. No explanation. Word came down that it was called off last minute. No new appointment set. Just radio silence. That sent its own shockwave through the place. Inmates started whispering about deals falling apart. Guards speculating maybe the defense is scrambling. Someone even suggested maybe he told them not to bother anymore. I caught Thompson muttering about how he's seen this before. High-profile guys thinking they can control everything, right up until the floor drops out beneath them. You remember Lenny, right? Thompson asked me later that shift, leaning against the break room wall. I nodded. Everyone remembers Lenny. Same deal. Came in all chest-puffed, lawyers lined up like bodyguards. Thought he'd charm his way out. Then, a month in, snap. Skipped meetings, wouldn't eat. Ended up in the infirmary before the trial even started. He paused, glanced toward the corridor. Looks familiar, don't it? I didn't answer, just stared down at the table, letting the hum of the vending machine fill the silence. It's the pattern that gets to you. You see enough men walk in here thinking they're untouchable, thinking they can outlast whatever's pressing down on them. Some hold up longer than others, some crack early, but there's always that moment, small, subtle, where you see the shift. The routine breaks, the mask slips, and then it's a matter of waiting. The past few nights, I've caught him sitting on the edge of his bunk long after lights out. Doesn't move much. Just sits there, staring at the far wall like there's something on it only he can see. Sometimes, his lips move, but no sound carries. Other times, he stays perfectly still, hands folded, shoulders tight. Meals go untouched more often than not now. He shows up for head count, walks the corridors, but the energy's gone. Whatever kept him upright before has thinned out, stretched too far. The other inmates notice, though they don't say much to his face. They just watch, quiet, waiting. And the thing is, it's not just the physical. There's something in his eyes now, vacant, detached, like whatever tethered him to the outside world snapped somewhere along the way, and now he's floating, trying to figure out how to land. Yesterday, word came down about an emergency court motion. Some paperwork shuffled through faster than usual. Nobody knows the details yet, but it's enough to stir things up. Enough to have Jenkins speculating whether his family's coming back, whether this is the end game playing out faster than anyone expected. I stood at my post later that night, staring down the dim corridor, the sound of distant murmurs bouncing off the concrete walls. And I couldn't shake the feeling, the sense that whatever's holding him together is splintering, piece by piece. You see enough men fall apart in here and you start to recognize the sound of something breaking before it hits the floor. Chapter 7. The Whisper Revenge. The first time I heard it, I didn't believe it. Not really. Not the way it was told to me, like some piece of throwaway gossip filtering down through the ranks. A passing comment in a hallway, slipped between heavier conversations about motions, filings, defense strategies. That's how things usually come to me. Half-finished sentences, whispered under breath, the connective tissue never quite in place. But even then, something about this particular piece stuck. It came from one of the clerks, a guy who's been around long enough to know the difference between baseless rumor and something that actually matters. He caught me outside one of the smaller courtrooms, papers stacked under his arm, voice pitched low even though nobody was hovering nearby. I could tell by the way he glanced around first, like he wasn't sure if he should even be saying it aloud. "You hear what he told his people?" he asked. No preamble, no small talk. I shook my head, expecting something trivial, maybe another round of speculation about his health, or some nonsense about a plea deal in the works. But then the clerk leaned in slightly, lowering his voice even further. Word is, he told him to cut ties. Publicly, completely. Said to let everything fall, let it all burn. Didn't want them sticking around for whatever comes next. He didn't elaborate. Didn't have to. I stood there for a few seconds after he walked away, pretending to focus on the stack of papers I was holding. But the words replayed over and over, looping like static in the back of my mind. Told them to walk away. That was the kind of thing you don't expect from someone like him. Especially not now, not after everything already stripped away, the walls closing in. Most men in his position would cling to whatever's left. Family, reputation, the thin veneer of loyalty that maybe still exists outside those concrete walls. That's the script everyone expects. You hold onto whatever pieces you can, because the alternative is staring too long at the reality of how far you've fallen. But if it's true, if he really said that, then it shifts everything. I couldn't shake it, even days later, as I moved through the usual motions, drafting documents, sitting in on calls, passing updates between attorneys. I kept circling back to it, trying to parse out whether it was real or just another one of the dozens of half-truths floating around since this all started. Everyone's got a version of what's happening. Everyone's got their theories. Some of them make it to the papers. Some of them get traded like currency between legal teams, the media, people like me who operate somewhere in the middle. But this felt heavier. I started paying more attention after that, watching how the other attorneys carried themselves, how certain faces disappeared from meetings. There were fewer public statements being made, fewer appearances from people you used to see flanking him, standing by him in press shots. The kind of absence you don't notice at first, but once you do, it's glaring. Like chairs left empty at a table, conversations started but never finished. And then there was the silence from the family. No visits logged, no scheduled calls, no statements issued. It could have been coincidence, could have been natural, everyone tired, burned out, trying to weather the storm from a distance. But combined with what I'd heard, it painted a different picture. That's when I started wondering why. Was it strategy? A calculated move to insulate them, make sure they didn't get pulled down into whatever mess was unfolding? Maybe. I've seen that before. High-profile cases where the defendant decides to pull the ripcord, sever ties to protect whatever's left of their legacy, or at least the people closest to them. Sacrifice the empire to save the bloodline. But something about it didn't sit right. It felt colder than that. I kept turning it over in my head, trying to imagine the scene. Him sitting across from them in that sterile visitation room, face hollowed out, voice low enough that no one else could catch the words, leaning in just enough to make sure they understood, to make sure the message landed, telling them to walk away, to disappear. There's a fine line between strategic detachment and something darker, between controlling the narrative and simply giving up. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt like maybe this wasn't strategy at all. Maybe it was surrender. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Some of the other aides speculated, quietly of course, that there was more beneath the surface, that maybe he confessed something in that moment, something bigger than the charges, something personal. Or maybe he issued a warning, veiled enough to fly under the radar, but sharp enough to land where it needed to. It's easy to project when you're on the outside, piecing together fragments. I found myself watching the news cycles differently after that, scanning for any hint, any mention of the family, checking public appearances, statements, even social media accounts, looking for signs, and every time I came up empty, it only added weight to the idea that they'd taken his advice or his order to heart. I kept wondering what it meant for the defense. His lawyers had been walking a tightrope from the start, trying to balance the crumbling empire with whatever slim chance they had left to salvage something, anything. Every connection severed made their job harder. Every silent relative, every absent ally chipped away at the image they'd spent months trying to preserve. But maybe that was the point. Maybe he knew there was nothing left worth preserving. The more I watched, the more I started seeing cracks everywhere. Meetings canceled last minute, phone calls cut short, legal documents missing signatures that once came without hesitation. Even conversations behind closed doors felt tense, clipped, like everyone was bracing for something inevitable, some final unraveling that no amount of legal maneuvering could stop. And still, no sign of them. No mother, no daughters, no distant relatives making statements on his behalf. Just silence. I couldn't decide if it was calculated or catastrophic, if he was pulling the strings even now from behind those bars, orchestrating his own collapse on his terms, or if the weight had finally become too much and this was the sound of someone letting go. Either way, the consequences rippled outward. His absence, their absence, the tightening noose of legal pressure, it all fed into the same narrative. One nobody could confirm, but everyone started to believe that maybe the man who once built empires was now content to watch it all crumble, piece by piece. I heard another whisper the other day from a paralegal passing by in the hallway. Said the next hearing might be pushed up sooner than expected. Said there's chatter that his team's pulling resources back, scaling down. Nobody knows for sure, of course. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever he said in that room, whatever words passed between him and the three people who used to stand beside him, no matter what, set something irreversible in motion. The silence speaks louder now than anything else, and it's starting to feel like the only thing left is watching how far it'll all fall. Chapter 8. No more visitors. There's a strange quiet that settles in once a man stops receiving visitors. It doesn't happen all at once, no dramatic announcement, no single moment where everyone turns and notices. But little by little, the absence becomes heavier than the presence ever was. You start picking up on it in subtle ways. Less paperwork crossing the desk, fewer names on the log sheets. Mail slowing down, thinning out. The routine begins to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, but for those of us who've worked these halls long enough, it's like noticing when the seasons change before the trees do. His name used to carry weight here, You'd hear it echo down corridors, passed between guards on rotation, whispered by inmates huddled at rec. There was a rhythm to it, something about the syllables that had inertia, tugging conversation in its direction. Every day, someone had something new, some rumor, some half-baked theory about his case, his health, what he said to his lawyers, what he said to his family. It was background noise, steady and reliable. But lately, that started to fade. I noticed it first during check-in. Used to be, every week, like clockwork, his family's names would pop up on the schedule. Never listed outright, always marked discreetly but clear enough for those of us handling the forms to understand who they were. I'd see the security team tighten, extra layers of checks slotted in, a slight shift in the guard rotations around visitation. Even the other visitors would sense it, their eyes flicking toward the entrance every time the door buzzed open. But weeks passed, and the line where his visitors' names used to sit stayed blank. No calls logged, no family members requesting time. After a while, the officers stopped glancing at that section of the sheet altogether. No need. It wasn't changing. Mail was next. Used to be he got more letters than most, not just the usual legal notices and statements, but personal ones, carefully handwritten envelopes, neatly addressed, the kind that made you wonder what was inside. Some guards joked about it, how he probably spent more time reading fan mail than prepping for trial. But now, it's mostly legal documents, dry and official. The stack thinned out until there were days we'd walk past his cell and find nothing slipped through the bar. Even the lawyers started showing up less. Meetings that once felt routine got spaced out, rescheduled, shortened. You could see it in their faces when they did arrive. Tighter, less patient, eyes focused somewhere else, even as they walked toward the meeting room. Like they knew how this story was ending and wanted to get through the formalities without wasting too much time. The inmates noticed, too, though no one talks about it much anymore. For a while, he was the center of every conversation. People betting on what verdict he'd get, speculating if he had one last play left. But after the visit stopped, after word got around that the family wasn't coming back, his name came up less and less. Newer arrivals didn't care. Older ones got tired of hearing the same stories loop around. Eventually, the noise quieted, leaving nothing but the routine behind. He still walks the corridors, but there's something different in the way he carries himself. Slower, more deliberate, shoulders hunched slightly, like something's been pressing down on him without letting up. The limp's worse now, more noticeable when he makes his way past the cells. His clothes hang looser, skin drawn tighter around the edges of his face. The gray in his hair's no longer streaked. It's taken over completely. He keeps his eyes down most days, doesn't bother scanning the room like he used to. Court days are the worst. There's something about the way the facility changes pace when one of those big dates comes up. You can feel it in the air. Tighter schedules, more guards posted near exits, buzz of radio chatter picking up. Everyone moves a little quicker, more on edge. When he steps out for transport, it's stark, frail, smaller than he once seemed, hands tucked in, head low. Reporters used to crowd outside, lenses pointed, waiting to catch a glimpse. Now, the crowd's thinner. Some outlets stopped sending people altogether. Other cases have taken over, new headlines pushing him further down the page. In the courtroom, he barely speaks, just sits there, eyes fixed ahead, voice low enough that the stenographer leans in each time he answers. No grand gestures, no statements. The spectacle's gone, just another man in a lineup of cases moving through the system, indistinguishable from the rest. Back at MDC, the staff talks less about him too. Used to be you couldn't walk past the break room without hearing his name thrown around. What he looked like that day, whether he seemed off, theories about his defense strategy. But now, when his file comes up, it's all procedural. No comments, no jokes, just initials checked, forms filed, schedules confirmed. I caught Jenkins the other day standing by the visitation board, updating the list. He paused for a second before wiping off the names that had been sitting next to Diddy's slot for months, untouched. Didn't say anything about it, just grabbed the eraser, cleared the space, moved on to the next. That's when it hit me. There wasn't even a conversation about it. No decision to be made. It was just another slot, another blank space on the board. He's not a name now, not a headline, not a figure people watch out of curiosity or fear, just another case file, moving its way through the process like all the others before it. But even so, there's something about the way he walks back to his cell at night that makes me wonder. Makes me pause just long enough to ask if maybe, just maybe, there's something still brewing beneath that silence. Some last move, some final unraveling we haven't seen yet. Because I've been in this place long enough to know, the ones who go quiet sometimes leave the biggest echoes behind.